I have fallen in love with you so much. I can't think of anything else but you. Will you allow me to show you what love really is?
You already are. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm being chosen out of pity or expectation. I feel chosen, completely. And yes, I want to learn love from you too. I was here on my own, not because I had nowhere to go, but because even my penthouse felt heavier than this silence. 11 times, I cried. 11 times I believed it would be different. And 11 times I ended up heartbroken. People think I have everything, but they don't see what it costs when no one stays. And before we go further, if this story reaches you, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. Now, let's dive in.
She was there on her own, not because she had nowhere to go, but because staying alone in her mansion felt even heavier than sitting in public. It was her 11th heartbreak. Across the city, a single father named Daniel Carter was getting ready too. Not for romance, but for a blind date his sister had refused to let him skip.
Come on, you have to go to this blind date.
A blind date? No way.
Just one detail, look for a woman alone by the window.
That's it? That's all I get?
Trust me.
Neither of them wanted to be there. Neither of them knew the other existed. But in less than an hour, two very different lives were about to collide. And nothing about either of them would stay the same again. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet disappointment repeating itself in different forms until it no longer surprised her. So she did what she always did when life became too heavy to think about. She went out, sat in a restaurant, and pretended she was only there to eat. But in truth, she was there to sit with herself, to breathe, to try and understand how someone can have everything on the outside and still feel so empty on the inside. Claire was not just any woman. She was a billionaire CEO, a woman people admired from far away, but never truly understood up close. Because behind the success, behind the power, behind the wealth, was someone who had been hurt more times than anyone ever bothered to notice. Claire was obese, had been her whole adult life, and she had stopped being surprised by what that fact did to the way people treated her. The quick glance up and down, the polite smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the silence that follows, louder than any insult. 11 times. 11 different hopes. 11 different disappointments, not with shouting, not with cruelty she could point to and call unforgivable. Just with men who slowly, politely stopped trying, who found reasons to cancel, who said, "It's not you, it's me," while their eyes said something else entirely. And 11 times she had gone home and told no one. Because what do you say? That you're a billionaire who built an empire from nothing, who negotiates with men twice her age and wins, and you still cry in your car because somebody made you feel small for existing in the body you were born into? And tonight, she was not waiting for love. She had stopped believing in that for the moment. She was simply trying to clear her head. Daniel didn't believe in blind dates, not after everything life had already taken from him. Daniel was a single father, raising his 6-year-old daughter Lily alone after his wife passed from a short illness 3 years earlier. His life was not complicated because he wanted it to be. It was complicated because grief rarely gives a single father room to think about anything else, let alone himself. He was thinking about whether the babysitter had remembered Lily's bedtime routine, about whether Lily had finished her homework, about the quiet, constant weight of raising a daughter alone. He'd agreed mostly to stop his sister texting him about it. He had no expectations walking through those glass doors, which is, of course, exactly when life tends to surprise you. He had no idea who he was about to meet. He had no idea that the woman sitting alone in that restaurant was not there for him at all. And she had no idea that the man walking toward her table was about to change the direction of her entire life. Because sometimes, two broken stories don't meet by accident. They meet because life finally decides to write something different. Inside, he saw a woman sitting alone near the window, very still, like she was holding something together by sheer posture alone. He didn't know her name. He didn't know she ran 3 companies, or that Forbes had put her on a list twice, or that she'd built her empire from a laptop in a 1-bedroom apartment. His sister had only given him one detail to go on. Look for a woman alone by the window. She matched it exactly, so Daniel walked straight toward her table. He just saw a woman who looked like she was carrying something heavy and trying very hard not to let it show. He walked over. "I think we're supposed to meet," he said gently, like he wasn't sure he had the right table. Claire looked up and froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. She wasn't expecting this. A strange man, smiling, standing at her table like he belonged there. For a beat, neither moved. Daniel certain he had the right woman. Claire certain a stranger had just mistaken her for someone else entirely. Then Daniel did the simplest, most disarming thing. He didn't apologize and leave. He didn't make it awkward. He just asked, "Would you like to still have dinner anyway?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. It was such a small decision. She didn't know yet that it would be the decision that changed the rest of her life. Dinner started carefully, the way it does between 2 strangers who've both been disappointed before. But something shifted early on, and Claire noticed it before she could name it. Daniel wasn't doing the thing. He wasn't doing the polite but distant scan. He wasn't doing the conversational math people did around her, calculating her net worth, her usefulness, her, for someone her size, exceptions. He was just listening. When she spoke, he looked at her face, not past it, not around it. It had been so long since anyone had done that, Claire almost didn't know what to do with it. She asked what he did. "I work, and I take care of my daughter," he said. No resume, no performance. When he talked about Lily, his voice changed, softened into something unguarded. Claire went quiet for a moment, listening to a kind of love that asked for nothing in return. Then, without quite planning to, she told him the truth. Not about her company, not about her success, about being tired of being looked at and never actually seen, about the 11 times she'd let herself hope, about how exhausting it is to walk into every room bracing for a verdict on your body before anyone's heard a single word you've said. She expected the conversation to get awkward. It always did, the few times she'd been honest like this before, followed by a too quick reassurance, or worse, silence. Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't rush to comfort her with a compliment. He just said, quietly, "That must be a very heavy life." Not, "You're beautiful, don't worry about it." Not a denial of what she'd been through. Just an acknowledgement that it was real, and it was hard, and she didn't have to perform her way out of it for his comfort. It meant more to her than sympathy ever had. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Claire wasn't being observed. She was being understood. Halfway through dessert, Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. A text from his actual blind date, the woman his sister had really set him up with, apologizing for being over an hour late, stuck in traffic, already turning around to go home. Daniel looked at the message for a second. Then he turned his phone face down and didn't answer it. He'd walked in with only a vague description from his sister, a woman, alone, near the window, and Claire had matched it closely enough that he'd never doubted he had the right table. By the time he found out he hadn't, it no longer mattered. Somewhere between her laugh and the way she talked about her father and the unguarded honesty she'd just handed him like it was nothing, he'd already decided he wasn't going anywhere. He didn't tell her about the text. Not that night. There would be time for that later, and a good laugh to go with it. For now, he just put his phone away and asked her another question, because, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wasn't thinking about leaving. He was thinking about staying. When dinner ended, they stood outside a moment too long, the way people do when neither wants to be the one to say goodbye first. But Daniel had a daughter waiting. Claire had a world waiting. So they parted, quietly, without promises. But something had already started. Something neither of them could fully name yet. That night, Daniel came home to Lily waiting on the sofa, and for a moment he forgot everything else. But later, in the quiet, he found himself thinking about the woman at the restaurant, not because of who she was, but because of how human she'd felt. Across the city, Claire sat in her large, beautiful, silent house. The silence felt different that night. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about being alone. She was thinking about him. A week later, Daniel called. Not a text, a call. He said he didn't want to hide behind a screen for this. They met a second time. A quiet walk through the park, no restaurant, no pressure. Just two people talking like they'd known each other longer than they had. Daniel never treated her like she was above him, and he never treated her like she needed, managing because of her size. He treated her like she was simply beside him, an equal, a person, someone whose hand he wanted to hold, walking down the street, in full view of anyone who wanted to look. And he did. Somewhere between the second bench and the fountain, his hand found hers, and neither of them let go. They stopped walking without deciding to. The city kept moving around them, but for a moment, neither of them noticed it. Daniel looked at her like he was asking permission. Claire looked at him like she was finally ready to give it. And then he kissed her.
I love you.
I love you more. You're my everything.
There was no hesitation in it, no moment where she braced herself to be let down. Just his hand on her face and his mouth on hers, and the strange, quiet certainty that this one was different. When they pulled apart, Claire laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and Daniel just smiled and said, "I've been wanting to do that since the restaurant." That was the moment the 11 disappointments started to feel like a different lifetime. A few weeks in, Claire insisted on cooking for them instead of going out, said she wanted to show him something restaurants couldn't. She made a pot roast the way her late mother used to, and homemade bread that filled the whole apartment with the smell of it, and Daniel sat at her kitchen table, watching her move around the kitchen like she belonged there completely. He realized, somewhere between the second helping and Lily's third request for more bread, that he wasn't just attracted to her, he was in awe of her. He had met beautiful women before. He had never met a woman this good, this patient with a hyper 6-year-old asking 100 questions, this warm with strangers, this quick to notice when a waiter was having a hard night and leave him a little extra. Claire was simply one of the kindest people he had ever known. Not performatively kind. Not kind because someone was watching. Kind in the unremarkable, everyday ways that only show up when nobody's keeping score. Lily started asking, almost weekly, "When is Claire coming over?" And then, eventually, stopped asking and just assumed she would be. Daniel never once factored her size into how he felt about her. It simply wasn't part of the math. What he saw was a woman who ran $1 billion empire by day and came home and braided his daughter's hair without being asked. A woman who remembered how he took his coffee after the second time, not the 10th. A woman whose heart, he was beginning to realize, was the most extraordinary thing about her. And everything else was just details. Lily loved Claire almost immediately, the way children do before adults overthink it. She'd grab Claire's hand at the park, demand piggyback rides, tell her solemnly that her drawings were the best in the world, better than Daddy's. Claire, who had spent her whole adult life being seen but never known, found in that small, loud 6-year-old's love something she didn't know she'd been starving for. If you are enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support means a lot and helps us bring you more exciting and heartfelt stories. Thank you. Back to the story. Then, almost without warning, the relationship met its first real test. Daniel had mentioned, in passing, that he'd be tied up with work over lunch that week. Claire decided to surprise him anyway, packed a bag with his favorite lunch and a few small treats Lily loved too, and drove across town to the exquisite little eatery near his office. She walked in smiling, already picturing his face. Then she saw him. Daniel was seated near the back, leaning in close to a woman, laughing at something she'd said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Claire stopped walking. The bag in her hand suddenly felt very heavy. For one long second, 12 years of practice took over before she could stop it. The old voice, the one that had narrated all 11 disappointments, rose up fast and certain. Here it is. This is the one where it finally happens to you too. She didn't storm over. She didn't make a scene. She simply turned. Daniel saw her the moment she turned to leave, saw her face go pale and still, the exact look of someone bracing for a blow she'd been expecting her whole life. He was on his feet before she'd even reached the door. "Claire, wait!" She didn't wait. By the time he made it outside, her car was already pulling out of the lot. He called. She didn't answer. He texted. She didn't reply. He drove straight to her apartment building and asked the doorman to ring up. Claire told the doorman quietly that she wasn't receiving visitors tonight. Daniel didn't argue with the doorman, and he didn't leave either. He simply said he'd wait in his car outside, and that if she changed her mind, even at midnight, even at 3 a.m, he'd still be there. He told the doorman, loud enough for the message to reach her, that he'd sleep in that car all night before he'd drive away without talking to her. And he meant it. He sat there for hours. No music, no phone, just watching the lit window on the 9th floor and waiting. Past 11 o'clock, the window finally went dark, and a few minutes later, Claire's name appeared on his phone. She didn't say much, just told the security desk to let him drive in. Upstairs, in the quiet of her lounge, Daniel didn't start with an explanation. He let her speak first. And once she did, once the whole story came out, the eatery, the panic, the certainty that she was finally watching it happen to her too. He told her gently that the woman at that table was his sister, Sarah, who'd stopped by his office to drag him out to lunch because she said he'd been working too hard. Claire pressed her hands over her face for a moment, equal parts relief and embarrassment. "I overreacted," she said quietly. "I know I did, I saw it happening again before I even gave you the chance to explain. 11 times taught me to run before I get hurt, not to stay and find out." Daniel reached for her hand. "You don't have to apologize for being scared," he said. "I just need you to let me stand there with you the next time you feel it, instead of finding out after you've already driven home." They stayed up talking long after that, not just about the eatery, but about everything they'd each been quietly carrying and never fully said out loud. Daniel told her about the loneliest parts of raising Lily by himself. Claire told him about boardrooms full of men who underestimated her, and a father who'd spent a fortune trying to buy her a happiness he couldn't actually purchase. They made a quiet promise, the kind that mattered more than any grand declaration. No more guessing, no more disappearing, no more carrying fear alone when the other person was right there to carry it with you. Later, they stepped out onto her balcony with a bottle of champagne neither of them finished, the city glittering below them, and somewhere between the second glass and the third, the heaviness of the evening turned into something lighter. Laughter, easy conversation, her head eventually finding his shoulder as the night wound down. It was, in its own strange way, the night that made them stronger. Not because nothing had gone wrong, but because something finally had, and neither of them had walked away from it. A few days later, Daniel brought Claire to meet Sarah properly. No misunderstandings this time. Just his sister pulling Claire into a hug like she'd already decided to like her, and teasing Daniel mercilessly about the time his girlfriend almost left him over a lunch date with his own sister. Claire laughed harder than she had in years. A few weeks later, Claire walked into a board meeting and forgot, for the first few minutes, why she was there. She was smiling at her phone under the table. She caught herself humming in the elevator. She said yes to things faster, pushed back on things less, and twice came in late because she'd lost track of time on the phone with Daniel the night before. Her board noticed before she admitted anything. One of the senior female directors, a woman who had watched Claire build her empire alone for a decade, leaned over during a break and said, "You're glowing. Whoever he is, don't let him go." Claire didn't deny it. She just smiled, and for once didn't feel the need to explain herself to anyone. One night, months later, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch between them, Daniel turned to Claire in the quiet and said it plainly, without ceremony, the way he said most true things. "I love you, all of you, every part you've ever apologized for. I love especially." Claire didn't have a clever response ready. She didn't need one. She just leaned into him, and they stayed like that, tangled together on the couch with Lily breathing softly beside them, until it felt less like a confession and more like a fact they'd both already known. Claire's father, Richard, was a trillionaire, a man who had built an empire so vast that people forgot he was also just a father who worried about his only daughter. He had given Claire everything money could buy, and he had watched helplessly as none of it bought her the one thing she actually wanted. He'd seen the 11 heartbreaks up close, watched her come home from each one a little quieter, watched her build higher and higher walls out of boardrooms and quarterly reports, because walls don't reject you for how you look. When Claire finally brought Daniel home, Richard didn't ask about his bank account. He didn't need to. The moment Richard heard the name, something flickered across his face. "Daniel Carter," he repeated slowly. "Carter Energy?" Claire turned to Daniel, confused. Daniel just rubbed the back of his neck, the way he did when he was caught. He was Daniel Carter, founder of Carter Energy, one of the largest independent energy companies in the country, a man whose own fortune sat comfortably in the billions. He had simply never led with it. Not on the blind date, not on the park bench, not once. His sister had no idea what she'd really set up. To her, he was just her tired brother who needed a night out. "You never said," Claire said quietly, still stunned. "You never asked what I was worth," Daniel said. "You asked how I was doing. Nobody's done that in years, not since before I had real money. I wasn't going to risk losing that by leading with a number." It landed harder than he expected, because Claire understood that fear better than anyone. The fear of being loved for the wrong reason, or not loved at all for the truest one. Two people, each guarding the same kind of wound from opposite directions, had found each other anyway. He watched how Daniel looked at her. He watched Lily climb into Claire's lap like she'd always belonged there. And for the first time in years, Richard exhaled. "I always wondered what it would take," he told Claire quietly that night, "for someone to look at you the way you deserve to be looked at. I just didn't think I'd get to see it." On a quiet evening not long after, Daniel took Claire back to the same restaurant where it had all begun. The same window table, the same view of the street. He didn't make a speech. He just took her hand the way he had that first night and said, "I think we're supposed to be together for the rest of this, if you'll have me." Then he knelt, right there by the window, in front of strangers who slowly stopped eating to watch. Claire said yes before he'd even finished the question, and when he stood back up, he kissed her, right there, in public, in front of everyone, like he wanted the whole room to know exactly who he'd chosen. The proposal might have come back where it all started, but the wedding itself belonged to a dream Claire had never told anyone, not even Daniel, until now. Claire had dreamed of this since she was a little girl, getting married above the clouds. Her mother used to tell her that the higher you flew, the smaller your problems looked, and somewhere along the way, the idea had lodged itself permanently in her heart. So that's where they married, aboard a private aircraft, 30,000 feet above the ocean, the cabin converted into rows of seats facing a small altar, golden light pouring through every window. Lily walked the narrow cabin aisle, scattering flower petals with the seriousness of someone performing brain surgery. Richard walked Claire down that same aisle himself, and at the end of it, instead of simply handing her off, he held her face in his hands for a moment and said, "You were always enough. I just needed you to find someone who knew it too." Two billionaires' worlds, built separately, guarded carefully, folded into one family at 30,000 feet, with nothing between them and the sky. Not long after, Claire found out she was pregnant. The doctor's news, when it came, made even Daniel, usually steady, unshakable Daniel, sit down hard in the nearest chair. Quadruplets. 2 boys, 2 girls. The pregnancy was not easy. Claire's body had been the subject of other people's opinions her whole life, and now it was doing the single most extraordinary thing a body can do, growing 4 lives at once. And for the first time, she found herself looking at it with something like awe instead of judgment. Daniel never once made her feel like a burden through the hard months. He rubbed her feet at midnight. He held her hair back during the rough mornings. He told her, more than once, that watching her carry their children was the most beautiful thing he'd ever witnessed, and he meant it with his whole chest. When the day finally came, it came fast and loud and overwhelming, the way big moments often do. 4 babies, 4 heartbeats joining the world within minutes of each other. Daniel stood at Claire's side through all of it, gripping her hand, saying her name like a prayer. And in the waiting room, Richard, a man who had closed deals worth more than some countries' GDP, without so much as a raised pulse, paced like a nervous schoolboy until a nurse finally opened the door. When he was allowed in to see them, all 4, wrapped and tiny and impossibly real, something in him broke open. This man who had spent his whole life able to buy anything finally received the one thing no amount of money could manufacture: the sight of his daughter, fully loved, fully happy, surrounded by a family that chose her, all of her, without condition. He stood at the edge of the room and wept. Quietly, the way men of his generation were taught to, but openly enough that Daniel walked over and put a hand on his shoulder, and Richard let him. "I'm fulfilled," he whispered, more to himself than anyone. "I finally got to see her happy." Years later, the house that was once so loud with silence is loud with something else entirely. 4 children running through it. Lily, now a teenager, who still insists Claire is her real mom in every way that matters. Laughter spilling out the windows on summer evenings. Daniel still looks at Claire the way he did that first night at the restaurant. Like he sees all of her, and all of her is exactly what he wants. And Claire, who spent 11 heartbreaks believing her body made her a smaller kind of lovable, finally understands something she wishes she could tell every woman bracing for the same look she used to brace for. You are not waiting to become worthy of love. You already are. You just haven't met the person yet who knows it on sight. Somewhere out there, for every woman who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or quietly diminished because of how she looks, there is a Daniel. Someone who isn't measuring you against anyone's standard but his own heart. It might take 11 tries. It might take more, but it is real, and it is coming. If you enjoyed this love story, please like, comment, and subscribe to see more heartfelt tales. Your support helps us continue creating the stories that make your heart race.